Let's talk a little bit about our good old friend dopamine. I've talked about this in the realm of addiction on this show before, but the relationship between dopamine and goal setting is something that people don't generally understand. And I always love being able to look at the physical substructure behind
Absolutely.
the philosophy.
Yes. Well, so yes, the news there is very good. So dopamine is part of the seeking system. It's produced now. The seeking system has been very well defined by two neuroscientists, I would say. One is Jaak Panksepp, that's Jaak Panksepp, Panksepp, who wrote a great book called Affective Neuroscience. And that's outlined in my reading list on my website. And the other is Jeffrey Gray, who was a student of Hans Eysenck, who was the most highly cited psychologist that ever lived. And Jeffrey Gray and Jaak Panksepp are both geniuses. Unfortunately, they're both they both are deceased. But their research and the research of all the people they drew on, because they were both familiar with thousands of papers and hundreds of researchers, dopamine locks you onto the scent. So what it does is it's a chemical that's manifested in relationship to the pursuit of goals. Okay, so here's the issue. The more valuable the goal, the higher the quality of the motivational state associated with its pursuit. Now, man, you really want to know that, because I might say, well, aim high. And you might say, well, why? And I might say, well, because that's how you redeem the world from its suffering. It's like, well, that's not bad. That's not a bad start. But then I could say, well, there's nothing that you can possibly do that will be better for you from a motivational perspective. You know, like you don't want to set an impossible goal and continually fail. That's you have to be intelligent and canny about this. You have to set goals that, you can successively approximate, but you're aiming high. And then what happens is that, let's say you accomplish something, but it doesn't move you anywhere you care about. Well, then the net psychophysiological consequence of the accomplishment is going to be zero. But let's say you accomplish something small even, but it moves you towards something extremely valuable. Well, you're going to get a kick out of that. And that kick, that dopamine kick, that's going to bathe the neural processes that you use to attain that accomplishment in the fluid that rejuvenates and strengthens them. Literally, that's what happens, because dopamine doesn't just feel good. It reinforces the structures that produced it. So it's nourishing. It nourishes the you that you want to bring into existence. And so if you want to remain in stasis, then you can get your dopamine with alcohol and cocaine. But
Right.
You'll pay for that, because for every heavenly experience you get that way, you'll get a counterbalancing hellish experience that will be of greater significance, generally speaking. It's a net negative game.
Well, or for a lot of the younger set, pornography and video games are the way that, and then video games, of course, specifically engineered as dopamine pellet dispensers. They actually test these things out to make sure that the gradation of challenge and reward is enough to keep you hooked. But of course, it is an empty experience, because you can fool your dopamine system, but you can't fool your soul as to whether you're actually achieving anything in the world deep down.
Well, I'm a little bit more sanguine with regards to video games, because if the game is well structured, then there's a manner in which it's analogous to life. So I think you can pick up generalizable skills in the video game environment, especially if you're a socially isolated introvert. I think that can be a way forward. But let's be clear about that. That doesn't mean that all you should be doing is playing video games, right? It means that you should make your pursuit of video games part of having a life, and you should use the video games to make you a more effective individual in the actual world. Now, pornography, well, I don't know if there's anything good that can be said about pornography. I think that it's pretty much an untrammeled social evil. The only thing I could say about pornography is that its introduction into communities seems to decrease the probability of violent rape. There's some reasonable data on that.
Right.
But in terms of psychological development, it's not to be recommended, and for the reasons that you described. It's a stimulus that has been detached from its purpose, and there's nothing noble about masturbating to pornography, and I think everyone knows that. even if you regard it as a physiological necessity for people who are deprived. Right. But there's nothing about it that's a noble pursuit. And I don't think anyone would ever make that the claim to the contrary.
Right.
And so if it's not a noble pursuit, then perhaps you shouldn't be pursuing it. So, and with drugs like cocaine's a direct dopamine agonist. And you know, with rats, you can get lonely, isolated rats who live singly in cages to take cocaine in preference even to eating and sex. But you can't get rats that are living in a natural environment and doing the proper rat things addicted to cocaine.
Well, and this is, I've talked about before with regards to addiction, that people who have a dopamine deficiency will often feel normal for the first time in their life. They're not pursuing a high, they're pursuing basic normal functioning. And what happens is when they get the extra dopamine, it crashes down lower than it was before. If people are normally at like 100, and then somebody who's normally at like 20 gets to 80, they feel vaguely normal, and then they realize the agony of their existence even more, which is one of the reasons why they pursue it again. Whereas people who go from 100 to 150 go back down to 100. They're like, this is not so bad. So let's talk about we talked about the difficulty of it, and while you were talking, the thought popped into my mind, Edmund Hillary's famous phrase, and why do you climb Mount Everest? Why do you want to climb that mountain? He says, well, because it's there, because that's where the most dopamine is, right at the top, because it's the most challenging thing you can do. So you want a significant amount of challenge, and also the goals are ideally intrinsic to your value system and something that you want, not something where you're fulfilling somebody else's script. That's not going to give you the satisfaction that you want.
Well, you can start because you're ignorant and know little about the world and malevolent and broken and fractured and clueless. You might want to listen to what other people have to say about what is worth pursuing. And that's especially true if you're young, and it might even be especially true if you're young, male, and fatherless, something like that. So if people are suggesting to you that certain pathways forward are tried and true, you might not want to be too cynical about that. But fundamentally, it is the case, and it's the philosophy behind the self-authoring program, that you're asked to commune with yourself. It's like it's your tragedy that we're dealing with. It's your catastrophe in life. It's your destiny. And you can ask yourself, well, as far as I'm concerned, what pathway would make my life worth living? And then you can add more to that. You could say, well, what pathway would make my life worth living optimally in a way that would also improve other people's lives around me, so that we could all stroll together as brothers, let's say, towards a higher mode of being. It's like, well, that's a good game to play. Why not play that one?